solstice, and where solstice just passed, and yeah, happy summer to transitions. My name is Dr. Roberta Suzette Hunt, and I am our facilitator for our Equity Advisory Group for our June meeting. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Will you put up our slides? Emily? Thank you.
Yes.
Beautiful. All right, next slide. Closed captions are in English and Spanish. English closed captions are available within Zoom and YouTube. Users can follow this link to view both English and Spanish captions in a separate browser window. That's ibr.news/captions. Next slide. So we encourage EAG members to turn on your video. Please say your name when you begin to speak. And if you experience technical difficulties, please contact program staff at 360-329-6744. Next slide. So for public input, there will be an opportunity to provide brief public input later in the meeting today. Our meeting goes till 7:30. To submit input after the meeting, email comments to info@interstatebridge.org with EAG Public Comment in the subject line. Call 888-503-6735 and state EAG Public Comment in your message. Our agenda, we start with a program update with our administrator, Greg Johnson. We have a design presentation, and we will learn about bridge design goals. If we have time, we will talk about a letter of support that is being requested. We will have public comment and a closeout. So passing to Administrator Johnson, you're up.
I think he just got here, so he might be getting settled. Yeah, looks like he's connecting.
Great.
He might be having
Some technical challenges.
Issues. Let's see.
Jake looks like he's joined by a mobile, so let's give him another 10 seconds and see how it goes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
So I am in the middle of a power outage in Michigan. So I have like a half a bar of cell reception because my Wi-Fi is out.
Excuses, Greg.
I know. So if you can hear me, I'll jump into my update and turn it back over to you guys.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. Well, the program team has been dedicated to getting out to a number of venues this summer. So we've had 2 neighborhood forums, one last month in Vancouver and one earlier this month in Portland, which were fairly well attended. And we reached a number of folks to let them know how we are moving forward with the drafts. Can you still hear me?
Lost you a little bit there, Greg.
This might be tough, but anyway, so we continue to go to fairs and festivals. So once again, we appreciate any ideas that that the EAG may have where we can show up. We were at the Juneteenth celebration. We've been at the farmers market in Vancouver and a couple of other venues that just trying to get the word spread about where the program is at and the coming opportunity for comments on the draft supplemental, which we will release late this year. The other major thing that's going on is we are preparing to submit federal grants. As everyone probably has heard, we were successful in the Oregon legislature. They have pledged $1 billion. So all of our local funding is now in place. So now we are going after federal match dollars. So this is a tremendously important milestone. This was one of the milestones that killed the last program because we didn't have consensus from both states. This time we do. Both states legislatures have given us $1 billion to move this program forward. So our federal grant applications, we think will be going in late summer. And so we will be looking for letters of support from not only individuals, but from groups like the EAG to once again demonstrate our regional support to move this project forward. We are also continuing to work on issues of permitting with the United States Coast Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers. So we have approximately 5 different scenarios that we have put forward, and one of those scenarios includes a movable stand at the request of the Coast Guard. But we are also working on a second path to where we are trying to work with the other impacted users that need more than 116 feet, so we can mitigate for those folks and get this project a height on the bridge set before we move in the final environmental impact statement process. Once again, we've been doing a number of presentations and briefings. We have met with the Oregon Environmental Council for the second time to talk issues and concerns that they have. We also met with Just Crossing Alliance to talk a number of their concerns. So it's been some very good conversations and to reach some level of understanding of why the program is proceeding on the path that it's proceeding. So it's been tremendously busy. We have released to our federal partners the administrative draft of our draft supplemental. That is the first step to getting that draft out later this year by getting our federal partners' comments. So once again, the program is moving forward. We're on schedule. So with that, I think that's my only slide. Oh, we have the renderings that we released. So I'll quickly walk you through the type of bridge that's called an extra dose. It has shorter towers and cables that support a bridge. This is a single level design. And once again, this is so the next slide, please.
Greg, I'm afraid we didn't really hear what you said there. We heard next slide, please. And we saw this image, but we didn't get to hear you explain it.
I might jump in. I'm not sure if he's still there, but this is Casey Lyles. So this is a view of the fin back bridge, also the single level, similar to the extra dose bridge that was just shown. The cables above the bridge are wrapped instead of exposed cables, but very similar in profile looking. And I think next. This is a view of the single level bridge with these kind of haunched segmental concrete girders. You can see that they have just a little bit of a profile as they reach each of the piers. This would be similar to like the I-205 Glenn Jackson Bridge style bridge. Next. And this one is reflecting something similar to the last, but instead of the concrete and called segmental box or haunch girders, this just reflects steel girders sitting on top of the pier, the columns. Also very similar in profile. And the last one we have here is a view of the movable span option. And it's currently reflecting that as a lift bridge in the up position. You can see the little bit more modern, of course, looking than the existing lift towers that are out there. In this case, the lifting mechanisms are captured within those towered options as shown. And we do have a view of it closed as well. And this one, people might be more familiar with this as we've, this was a similar design as we ended in 2013 from the Columbia River Crossing program with a the double level bridge with a truss. This reflects the traffic on top in both directions, and then underneath you have the transit and the shared use path on the lower level. We can see the exposed lower levels through that truss section. I believe that's it for the road.
Casey, I know you. This was Greg was gonna show these, so I don't know if you're totally prepared, but I'm wondering if you could quickly kind of just give the context and explain what sort of these visualizations are and what they aren't, and kind of why we're showing them at this point in the project.
Yeah. So those visualizations essentially represent what we are studying as far as bridge configuration options in the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. So reflects that we have a couple of different options. Like I said, the single level bridge options, a couple options that you saw in there, and then the double level bridge. And the third option being the movable span bridge. Like I said, those three options being studied within the draft supplemental EIS. Those would go through, again, the formal comment period at the publication at the end of this year. What those don't represent is final design. Those are not, what I'd say, they're based on conceptual level design at this point. So there'd be much more design work to do to get into more specifics of each of those. Jake, did that cover most of what you're thinking?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
And I think I'm next as well.
Well, yes. why don't we move to you? And well, before we move to you, one thing I realized was that we hadn't said hello to each other. We kind of just jumped in, and we usually say hello. So if we could, if everyone, I understand today is a packed day, so we don't get to spend too long here. But if everyone could just share your name, your pronouns, your organization, and then your role with your org, and then we'll pass to you, Casey. So who would like to start? Well, Sabrina. I
was coming off mute.
I was like, why are you taking so long? You know what you do.
Awesome. All right. Sabrina Owens Wilson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director at Metro. And I will pass it to John.
Good afternoon or evening. John Gardner with TriMet Chief Equity Officer. I use he, him pronouns, and I will pass it to Aiden.
Thank you, John. Aiden Gronauer with the IBR Program Civil Rights Manager. I use they, them pronouns or he, him. And I will pass it to Nicole.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Chen. I am the business partner for the Office of Equity and Inclusion for the City of Vancouver. Should I pass it to my director, Alicia Sojourner?
Your coworker, Alicia Sojourner, the Director of Equity and Inclusion for the City of Vancouver. Thanks, y'all. I shall pass it to, let's see, tons of people haven't gone, but I wasn't paying attention. Meg.
Hi, everyone. My name is Meg Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here as just an individual citizen from Vancouver area, but I also subsequently also have my first day at the City of Vancouver today at City Hall. Woohoo. I am now a special events specialist for the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services team there. So I'm very excited to have that gig, but also to be here and to talk about the bridge that I now get to see every day. I will pass it to, let's see, Millicent.
And she's IBR staff. Jennifer, do you mind going next?
Sure. My name is Jennifer Campos. I'm a principal planner with Southwest Washington Regional Transportation Council, and I use she, her pronouns. Has Nicole gone?
Yes, I went, but I will gladly pass it over to Brent.
And Jake, I think we're into IBR staff now, if we want to.
All right, I'll go. Jake War, IBR Equity Team. I'll pass it over to Emily.
Hi, everyone. Emily Thomas Peralta, IBR Equity Team, and I use she, aya pronouns, and I'll pass it to Jenna.
Good afternoon, everyone. John L. Bell, Principal Equity Officer for IBR, and I use he, him pronouns. And let's see, maybe we'll go to Shannon.
Hello, Shannon Singleton. My pronouns are she and her, and I am on the community. I'm the community engagement lead for IBR, and I will pass it to Kellyanne.
Hi there, I am Kellyanne Amico, and I work in the media space for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program and social media. She, her.
Is that everyone? Has Brent gone? All right, then I think we have everyone. So let's bring those slides back And Casey, you are up again.
Thanks, Dr. Hunt. I would like to introduce Rob Turton and Mike Pishka. They're on the call as well. And we didn't get a chance to see, were there any questions about the visualizations? Sorry to go back to that, but just want to make sure. I know we have some things to move on, but we do have some design experts here.
Meg.
I did have a question. Are all of the visualizations based around the idea that they're about the same height? So there's not a huge height difference in terms of all of the different styles that we're looking at.
So the single, the single level bridge, let me go back up just a moment. So the height that we're looking at for the river crossing is to, of course, balance the needs of the river navigation as well as the highway users and also air navigation. So we have quite a thread to navigate in that, not to use that word as a pun, but the clearance over the river we're looking at for the fixed spans is 116 feet. That with the movable span, we're looking at somewhere between 90 and 100 feet of clearance. And when it's fully lifted, it would match the 178 feet of vertical clearance of the existing bridge. Yeah, did I capture all that? Rob?
Yeah, I think one thing that would be maybe of interest to everybody is as you saw, there were really two basic configurations there, a double deck version and a single level version. And one of the benefits of the single level version, while it is a wider structure, the roadway surface is basically at the lower level of the double deck version. So it's wider but lower and still provides the 116 foot of navigation clearance that Casey was just referring to. So there is a fundamental difference between those two basic configurations. Hopefully that's a little clearer.
In your, just a question that I had, in your presentation, will you talk more about why one might go with one or over the other?
I probably won't bring that up then, but we can answer that question now a little bit, right, Rob? After you get a drink.
Yeah. I was conveniently taking a drink at the time you asked that question. Yeah.
So now would be your opportunity, right? We don't have a later presentation on that, right, Rob?
I don't know.
No, as far as why single level goes with the extra dose and fin back versus the double level with the truss.
Yeah, I think one of the primary purposes of developing the renderings that you saw just a little while ago is to convey some of the different types of structures that may be able to be accommodated in the program, depending on the configuration that's decided upon. Like Casey said, we've got a decision to make in terms of it being double deck, single level, or single level with a lift span, okay? Once we get past that type of a decision, with the double deck bridge, there really isn't a lot of option. We're looking at a truss type system. A comparable structure would be the Markham, where you have an upper and lower deck and it's basically supported by a steel truss. There aren't a lot of other configuration or structure types that you can implement to accommodate that double deck. When you get to the single level configuration, again, it's wider, but it's lower. The actual interstate driving surface is lower. We have a little bit more variability in terms of what that type of bridge can be. We can support it from underneath using girders. You see a lot of girder type structures when you drive around town where the roadway deck is on top and then you have steel or concrete girders underneath supporting it. Another way to do it is to actually support the roadway from above. And that's with the two variants that you saw earlier. One was called an extra dose, which is the exposed cable, short tower cable stay type bridge. And the other one was the finback variant, which is just another version of a cable stay, like Casey was pointing out, except it's the stays are enclosed. But what those two variants do is they allow you to support the structure from above rather than below. Those are just different structure types that we may be able to accommodate if we go the path of a single level bridge. And so the purpose of these things was just to try and give folks an understanding of some of the things we're looking at. And with each one of these variants, we have to meet all of the purpose and need requirements and all of the operational requirements. So there's a lot of balancing. Some do a better job at this and not so good a job at that, and vice versa. So there's a lot of weighing that has to go on there to be able to get to a point where everybody can agree on what's the most efficient and effective way to proceed with delivering the program. So that's kind of, it's an exercise in trying to help people understand the types of things we have to look at to get to a working solution. Does that help, Casey?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And then I just might add that, Rob, one of the things that also helps us show what is not possible, just to remind people of the constraints. Rob mentioned we've got extra dose and the finback. What we don't show is a suspension tower bridge because we cannot go high above the deck due to the airport restrictions we've got from FAA. So we have basically a kind of a box that we have to fit in that we can go so low or so high. And this the illustrations kind of depict that so we know what our parameters are for.
Yeah, that's a great point, because an extra dose type bridge is very much a compromise between a girder bridge where you support it from below and a traditional cable stayed or suspension bridge where you support it totally from the top. What an extra dose or a finback is a combination of carrying some of the load in the girder system and some of the load in the cable system. And it allows the towers to be shorter so that we don't penetrate the protected airspace that Mike was just referring to.
Thank you. How are we doing on time, Dr. Hunt, once we get into the next piece here? I think
we're good. We're good to get going. Yeah.
Okay, great. I will share my screen, and while I'm getting set to do that, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Casey Lyles, and I'm a design manager for the IBR program. And well, I'm going to bring up what we affectionately call the roll plot. And what you might find on our website, hopefully you can see that if I can get a nod from, or shout back from somebody that can see the plan aerial map. Great, I see that, thank you. So this map is recently developed by the program, shared at the last community advisory group meeting as well. You can find this on our website. If you go to the upper right corner where you go look for the menu items and scroll down to documents, and under that you can find the LPA, and the first item under that would be area map, project area map. That's where this is located. So I want to point out a couple things, get oriented with this. This map is basically showing the improvements that are being studied in the program, being studied for the benefits and the potential benefits and impacts to the environment through our draft supplemental environmental impact statement. There's a legend in the lower right corner of that. I'm not going to zoom in because I don't need to necessarily read that, but the point of this map is to, again, reflect what the investments are, what the improvements are. It doesn't reflect what total impacts are within the program area. And I'll walk through left, right a little bit, but just note that as this group meets more, we will dive into a little bit more focused areas as the topics take us that area. For instance, if we talk about Hayden Island, we'll come back and talk a little bit more detail about Hayden Island itself and the investments there. But just to get oriented again with the program area and walk through at the high level for the design. The program investments on the map here are showing the 7 interchanges in the 5-mile stretch. On the left side of the map, you have the south end of the program in Oregon, Portland there. Victory Boulevard interchange, and then we have Marine Drive, Hayden Island on the Washington side. That's State Route 14 interchange, the Mill Plain interchange, the 4th Lane Boulevard interchange and the SR 500, State Route 500. North is to the right. You see the Columbia River in the middle. I want to talk through just we have 7 interchanges in the 5 miles, and these improvements address the 6 purpose and need statements. That's the congestion, safety, transit through the program, increasing active transportation, addressing freight, and seismic. So from the south to the north, just walking through, because these are closely spaced interchanges, as you work on any of the interchanges through the improvements, starting in the bridge and moving out, the improvements in design you take affects the next interchange and beyond, actually, including the mobility throughout the program area and safety as well. So at the south end of the program, not a lot of interchange changes itself at Victory Boulevard, but between Marine Drive and Victory Boulevard, we've had what's called a braided ramp system. And that means that as you come on to I-5 southbound, you braid with the lanes that are trying to go south on I-5 and getting off at the Denver Victory interchange. So that braiding helps separate traffic that wants to go that wants to weave across each other. That's one of those safety items and addressing the closely spaced interchanges. Marine Drive interchange itself gets an updated form, replacement of the interchange to what's called a single point urban interchange. That's one signal right in the middle over the top of I-5, where all of the movements for Marine Drive go through that single signal. As you go across the harbor onto Hayden Island, Hayden Island is shown with a partial interchange, and by that, that's the 2 ramps that come to and from the north side. So if you're coming southbound I-5 and you want to get to Hayden Island, you take the southbound off ramp and end up at the south end of the island on Jansen Drive. To head back north, take the northbound on ramp in the opposite direction, get on northbound. The part that's partial is the 2 directions that come from the south or go back to the south. They're actually located now on at the Marine Drive exit. So coming northbound, you take Marine Drive. I'll zoom in just a little bit. You stay left at the exit, go underneath Marine Drive, and end up at a local street down below. You head across what we'd call the arterial bridge here on the east side. Sorry, I'm going a little fast. Going on the east side and over to Hayden Island. And to get back to go southbound I-5, go in the opposite direction across the arterial bridge, go back underneath the freeway and over to the on-ramp in southbound direction. So that makes up the rest of the Hayden Island interchange, which is a partial interchange. The thing I want to point out, all of the green areas are improvements of the shared use path facilities. And there's also active transportation facilities that aren't in green, but as you see these local street improvements shown on, say, Hayden Island, for instance, you see the local streets that have both sidewalks and pedestrian facilities, sidewalk and bike lanes through that improved street network. So active transportation connections in all directions, east-west, along the south end of the Northport Harbor, connecting the 40-mile loop to the north-south shared use path and into Portland. As you go across into the river, you have the replacement bridges shown downstream from the existing bridges. What's not easily reflected here is that the existing bridges get removed after the new bridges are in place. You see the lime green with the active transportation shown on the east side of the new bridges and light rail transit on the west side of the bridges. I'm going to back up just a moment and talk about mass transit here just a little bit, back in the Oregon side. So with light rail extension from Expo Station near here on the west side of Marine Drive, the light rail extension underneath Marine Drive, over the levee, and with a new station on Hayden Island shown here in the yellow, kind of in between what extension of Tomahawk Island Drive and Hayden Island Drive. So a station, light rail being elevated across the island. In Vancouver, light rail coming outside or away from the existing or away from the bridges crossing the river, with a new station at the waterfront, shown here in yellow, close to the intersection of Columbia and Columbia. And then the terminus of the light rail extension up here at Library Square, right next to the existing library and Evergreen overcrossing. As we go into Vancouver, so that reflects the transit there. In Vancouver, we're reflecting the areas being studied for park and rides, ranging from 0 park and rides to 1 park and ride to 2 park and rides. There are actually 5 areas being studied for park and rides. The 2 on the right, which is these blocks of orangish pink color, reflect 2 locations that are being studied for potential park and ride at the Evergreen area or Library Square area. And then there's 3 locations in the waterfront, reflecting 3 different spots for a potential park and ride at the waterfront. And again, a range of study from 0 park and rides, or 1, for instance, 1 at waterfront, or 1 at Library Square, or 2, 1 at waterfront and 1 at Library Square. We also reflect the active transportation connections and the local street connections on the ground there of extension of Main Street. SR 14 interchange, as it comes off, has to be rebuilt due to the elevation of the freeway coming off, as well as the connectivity into downtown. Moving northward, see replacement of the Evergreen Boulevard overpass. You also see Community Connector, which is an active transportation connection across the freeway, or LID, you might hear. As you move northward, there's improvements to the Mill Plain interchange, more efficient type of interchange, address mobility and safety. Again, addressing the closely spaced interchanges in between State Route 14 and Mill Plain, or what we call collector distributor systems, in both directions. That's where those merges and weaves that I talked about before are taken off the main line I-5 and put it onto the, a couple of lanes on the side, away from the high-speed traffic. The fourth lane interchange is not a lot of revamp, except again between SR 500 and fourth plane. We have the same closely spaced issues and have a proposed braided ramp system between 500 and fourth plane. So if you're coming south on I-5, for instance, you need to go to fourth lane, you go underneath the ramps for SR 500 and the 39th Street on-ramp, you end up at fourth lane. And similarly, if you're coming SR 500, you come westbound, and you don't have to weave with the folks going to fourth lane. Replacement of the 29th and 33rd Street structures. And a lot of this too is related to the added width for the auxiliary lane as it goes between the few interchanges as shown. Couple of things I wanted to make sure to point out. It's a pretty quick walkthrough of the map. There are times when we'll come back through and again talk a little bit more detail. I also want to point out as you look through this, this is reflecting that there is that double deck bridge option that's shown in the main part. There's an inset map at the upper part of the screen showing what the single level bridge option would look like and just what the differences are. And the other option that's shown here is actually 2 different options. It's only showing it's only labeled with the what's called a west or the alignment through Vancouver. Option A is showing an alignment that's more easterly through Vancouver, and then option B in the inset map up here is showing a shift of the alignment through Vancouver to the west. And what that does is give us kind of a bookend of potential impacts with possibility of whether the impacts are more on the east side, west side, or some balance in between. The other part that this is actually showing too is the options being studied, whether we have the C Street ramps returning to the interstate. So in the in the main part of the map below, you see that you have a northbound off ramp that goes to C Street. And in the upper map, you see that that ramp is not there. And in this version, traffic heading northbound to get to downtown would go up to Mill Plain and head into downtown. In the opposite direction, the lower one is showing the connection from C Street onto I-5 southbound, and the upper one is showing that there is not a connection from C Street onto southbound I-5. And again, if you're going to head to I-5 southbound, you'd go up to Mill Plain and get on I-5 southbound. Those don't have to be all together options. In other words, the ramps don't have to go with the alignment shift, and both ramps don't have to go at the same time either. So it's a range of options being studied. The one other option that's in NEPA that's not shown on here are the auxiliary lanes, and the modified LPA has one auxiliary lane being studied. In addition, though, we are studying 2 auxiliary lanes in the SEIS. I want to reiterate that the line work in this is not reflecting individual property impacts. Property impact discussions formally don't start until after NEPA is complete. However, the DSEIS will describe what property impacts are within the program based on the investments. There are lines in here that, however, that I want to reflect and say what those lines represent. And it's in the legend, but you might see the line work that's outside of the roadway, for instance. And the darker line solid represents the area that we're studying that has the potential for permanent investments. So it's encompassing what all those permanent investments look like. The one caveat to that is where there are dashed lines shown outside of that are areas where we're studying still, and because we're at such an early stage of the program design, that there could be a need for underground easement, and those have to do with the design of walls, for instance, and or utilities, but walls are primary. And if we have to design walls that need an underground easement with a tieback or what's called a soil nail or big straps, anchors underneath, then we would need to address those with the properties as well. So again, the line work is reflecting permanent impacts or permanent areas of study, excuse me, not impacts. Temporary areas of study are not reflected on this at this time. It's very difficult to show in this roll map what potential temporary investments there are. And a lot of the temporary is really how do you get to construct it? And some of the areas we might, how do you build a sidewalk when you when you're right around someone's parcel? You need to be able to get on that property and be able to build that sidewalk as an example. So that's a pretty quick run through of the rural plots. So I'm open to see if there's any questions. And we'll stop sharing.
Meg.
Thank you. Casey, you showed a lot of potential or, needs to be looked at further for property in Vancouver that needs to be impacted. Were there any similar lines drawn on the Portland side, on the Oregon side, that would correspond with housing the same way?
So there are investments proposed that, let me bring it back up again. There are investments proposed in both Washington and Oregon that have the potential for residential and business impacts. And like I said, the line work does represent areas being studied. It does not say that any one individual parcel is absolutely being impacted. It is an area being studied. So some of those areas might say, for instance, the line of going across North Portland Harbor and where those hit. We still have to study and understand what that means to the local businesses and access, as well as, say, for instance, access and the possibility of having any connections to what that means to the floating home communities, both on the west side, and then we know that there's some mixed use on the east side, but potential residents as well as just the boat houses. So there's a mix in both sides with the potential of either business and or property, or excuse me, residential. And of course, with the evaluation of right-of-way becomes also a full evaluation of whether there's a partial acquisition or full acquisition displacement. All of that would be disclosed in the draft supplemental EIS as far as what that analysis would show. Meg, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very
Great.
much.
Yeah, you're welcome. We'll be glad to come back and talk to more details when we get to those subjects. Absolutely. Focus in a little bit more on movements, shared use path.
Casey, I'm going to be honest. I have a lot of questions. I think it was just a lot to absorb, and I'm just going to process it first, if that's okay, and then I'll probably ask at a later time. But thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's on their website. Take a look, and I think you know how to get a hold of folks.
Yes.
It's not in the meeting.
Thank you.
So I think in alignment with what Nicole was saying, I saw a lot, and I was trying to comprehend a lot, and I don't know how much I got, other than wow, that's a lot. And so I'm wondering, and it's so hard because we're on Zoom. If we were in person, then we could walk up to the map, we could look at it, we could ask you our questions, and you'd stand there and we'd point and you'd say, oh, and you would explain and we would understand. But it's just very complex. I appreciate hearing it. It's just hard for me to grok.
So I have to say I absolutely understand that, and for years of doing the same work, our two recent community forums were fantastic for having that this whole world map laid out in a 6-foot map, so people can stand around and point and ask interactive questions. And it's invaluable to go back and forth and talk. Oh, what about this? And it can be very difficult on here, but we would make ourselves available to be able to do that at any one of these. It does take some time to set up. So, but in person is absolutely available too.
It would help a lot, yeah. Well,
I defer to Jake and any plans on that in the future. So,
yeah. Well, how about John Gardner? I saw your hand.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'm like Nicole, man, where do we start? But maybe one thing that would help me is trying to understand the different designs and the potential traffic implications. Like, is there, for each design, and I don't know if we got this in the packet or not, like some of the sort of pros and cons of, what this design achieves versus another design? I'm curious about that. And obviously the movement of people and goods and services. And then it sounds like the active transit's there no matter what, but there may be some difference in the width of bridges. So is that something we will see if we look at the actual designs and sort of whatever their keys and what's rated?
That's a lot of questions that are really good. Some of those are all great questions, I want to say, because the map itself won't necessarily get you to like the actual width, won't tell you the operations, but the supplemental draft or their draft supplemental and EIS will tell you the details of that more. But what we could do is I started to hit a little bit on that with the options and what that means to folks. If the ramps to C Street aren't there, what does that mean for folks traveling? that means that they have to go up to Mill Plain and make their way into town. And similarly, in the southbound direction, that another idea is that, with like braided ramps, for instance, there's a bit of a trade-off that it's not really an option in the program, but you need to understand that it's hard to walk through that quickly. But I understand that we also need to know and give you the information to say what's different in that aspect today. So I tried a little bit to walk through what's different than today. I could give you one more example of that, and the one I meant to walk through that I didn't, for instance. Let me bring that back up real quick if you still have a few minutes. Are we doing okay on time, Dr. Hunt, Jake? So I walked briefly through. Can you see my screen again? With the partial interchange on Hayden Island, I briefly walked through how to get there if you were coming from, let's say, I-5 in Portland. If you were getting to Hayden Island and you were coming from Denver, for instance, today you'd get on I-5, you'd come underneath and get on I-5, and you'd take an exit and get off at Hayden Island. And the interchange today is not a great form today. It's not, it's certainly not modern. It's also not as easy for wayfinding. But if you want, in the future here with the partial interchange, to go through Victory or Denver to get to Hayden Island, I think that the ways to get there would be instead of coming northbound, because that northbound ramp actually exits at Marine Drive, for instance. To get there, you'd actually go underneath I-5 over to Hayden Meadows and around, and take what would be the local street connection over to Hayden Island. So just a slightly different bit of movements instead of getting on I-5. But the difference that also offers is that with this arterial bridge, access to and from Hayden Island today has to use the freeway. And what this arterial bridge means is that folks can get to and from the island without getting on the freeway. And I don't mean just the vehicles. Active transportation is on that facility as well. If you're on that, familiar with that today, the active transportation goes across right adjacent to the freeway lanes on North Portland Harbor. So just one barrier hop over. So that affords that different access to and from the island. That's one example that I probably should have walked through. But to kind of go through, we could spend a little bit more time in detail if we get to the topics on those. We can walk through some of that in more detail.
Sabrina.
Hi, thank you. Sabrina from Metro. I think one of the things I'm trying to, well, thank you for walking us through that, was that it's complex. And I feel like every time we see one of these presentations, it reinforces how complex this project is. I think this might be a question for maybe Janelle and Jake, but I guess I'm wondering, like, in this phase of the project, how we're applying the racial equity framework and how to assess these options through that lens, or our racial equity lens. I think that's what we called it. And like, I'm remembering some of the past presentations where they did like the dot matrix on like which components, or some grading on how well different options were advancing some of the components of the race or the equity lens. And so I'm wondering, like, I'm trying to do the mental exercises in my head of like, should we be carrying some of that evaluation forward to this conversation, or is that lens going to be placed on this phase of the project? Or I'm wondering if you can kind of help me place some of that work that we've done over the last year on kind of where we are now. If that makes sense.
Jack, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it. And sorry, I'm off camera. I've got unreliable Wi-Fi right now. Guess there's something in the air. So I one thing in particular that unfortunately we aren't able to share with this group at this time is a technical report that's part of our supplemental EIS, the environmental impact statement. And there's a whole bunch of technical reports, but one of them is an equity technical report that applies particularly three most relevant objectives in the equity framework to the evaluation of the different options of the modified LPA, and then a couple variations in there. So unfortunately, we aren't actually even legally able to share those publicly, as you probably know. But then besides that, I think a big thing that we are trying to do in having these conversations and bringing this information is get this group's help on really what it means to apply that here, because this is it is such technical, engineering information in a lot of cases, and so we honestly need help in figuring out like what equity in design means at each stage of the design process. So not totally able to answer your question at this point, but it's certainly something that we want to do. We want to figure out what it means, and we want this group's help with.
Thank you.
Casey, we're going to lean in there. Saw you unmute.
I did want to say one other thing, which is we're asking our designers as we walk through the continual question of what does this mean for the folks that are using it, both with product and process. Are we asking ourselves all the question, is there someone that's that we're missing in this conversation as far as how does that impact someone different than a different person? So it's a question that we often maybe don't have an answer that it would be different, but oftentimes we say we don't think that it would be different for different folks. So it is something that we want to certainly get better at, and that's something in my career as the DOT is, I think, especially with this program, putting that in our everyday thinking to have that conversation, and of course have the conversations here to say, what do you think about when we look at, for instance, single level bridge and double level bridge? What does that mean for? Does it have different impacts to different users? Or yeah.
I don't know if I'm saying this right, but it feels like we're asking each other for the same information. It feels like, Meg, did I say? It feels like we're asking you, how is this impacting? Have you looked that up? And it's like, yeah, we kind of have, but now what you tell us, how is it impacting? And I feel like there's somewhere in the middle. We probably all need to come together.
Yeah, and I think Jake's trying to hit on there's the technical report that gets documented what the benefits and impacts are proposed based on the investments in that. So which would be published later this year.
Shane?
The one, oh yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I'm just struggling with the same thing as Sabrina and Nicole. There's, and to put a finer point on it for me, there's a significant time and information asymmetry here. You all on the program, this is your work, you're super familiar with the project. We all here, while we are equity practitioners, we have, I work on this part of this corner of the project 2 hours a month when we're in this room. And so it's really hard for us to get a presentation like that, like Roberta was talking about. It's like, that's a lot to process. And then to be asked, how does this equity, how does it relate to equity is a pretty difficult question to ask. And so we created the equity framework so that the program can sort of apply it and digest all of the information there is in the project and bring to us sort of what those salient points are. And so I respect sort of that the program keeps coming to us with this really impactful, meaningful information, but it is really hard for us in this context and with this amount of time to digest that stuff. And then it sounds like you guys are asking us for a letter of support, and apparently legally you guys can't share sort of the most detailed information about how this bears on equity with us. And so I think that's a difficult ask for, at least for me, to consider not being able to discuss that information until that's publicly released, which I understand is going to be the end of the year. So I don't have any solutions, just I'm kind of thinking through this at the same rate that my colleagues here are.
Yeah, maybe I'll lean in here. Shane, appreciate those comments. I think what you're hearing from the IBR program team is that the equity framework is being integrated throughout the process of assessing, some of which we can legally daylight, others, as you can appreciate, coming from PBOT, we cannot, given just the environmental process that we're in. And, part of this is a continuous improvement process. Integrating equity into a mega project has never been done before. And so we're trying to strike that delicate balance of how much do we bring to the EAG that's meaningful and that is digestible. And so that will continue to be part of the hydraulics. Relative to seeking support from the EAG, I think we're going to probably kick that to the next meeting when we have more members from our community side of the EAG, I think, around the table. Obviously, all the partners involved will have an opportunity of weighing in through your respective ESG partners. And so certainly won't put the pressure on you tonight to lean in there. We do want to have a conversation with other members. We have mostly partner staff tonight. I think it speaks to summertime of having these meetings. And so May gets the gold award today, but we'll continue to find the right balancing act here as we again integrate the equity framework, and there'll be more opportunities of digesting this information. This is not the last time. The community advisory group had a robust conversation on the same information, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and they'll have another slice at that apple at a future meeting. So this is not the first time that the EAG will have an opportunity of weighing in. This is just the first time that you all have been socializing these concepts.
Thank you, Janelle, and thanks for Casey for coming to us with this.
Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to just give you a big preview, see what's coming, get familiar with it, looking at it, and then have those discussions and start asking those questions. So really appreciate that opportunity.
Maybe Dr. Hunt, I might just add, particularly since we do have so many of our partner practitioners around the table, is if there are additional models or thoughts that you all have relative to how we can integrate the framework in this process. You all have lived through your own NEPA processes, and so you know it better than perhaps many of us. We're open to that feedback and suggestions as well. That was one of the reasons why we were so intentional in having equity practitioners from our partners around the table, is that you're sort of hand in glove with us along the way. So do feel free to lean in with us, as you will oftentimes be exposed more to some of the inner workings of what we're grappling with than perhaps other members of the EAG.
So I think in transparency, so I heard a question in what Janelle, or a request. Is it a request for folks to really think about like how could you reframe your request, Janelle?
Well, it's more of an open request, Dr. Hunt, in that we're always open to our equity practitioners' counsel and feedback in terms of their understanding of NEPA and how we might continue to integrate the framework in this process. So it's more kind of an open ongoing request.
Got it.
And I'm also hearing that in the other direction is true too, that this group wants to see more about, you know, what we are doing behind the scenes that does integrate that equity framework. And so I think, and as Nicole said, yeah, we got to kind of meet in the middle. Like we are looking to each other, and that's how this is supposed to work. So yeah, we're getting there.
Okay, great. And so I also recognize that we have a video presentation, and that in the interest of time, it would be good to bring that on. John Gardner.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, thanks, Janelle, for that. Was a pretty straightforward, open suggestion or request. And I was wondering, I mean, we have the equity framework. Maybe it's easy that we need to make available to any future engineering or design firms and ask them how they are incorporating the framework into what they're proposing. Right. So I don't know if I don't know if we have to overcomplicate this. We did so much work at the beginning. So now that firms are getting brought on into this to sort of show us their approach, it's really more, how does their approach reflect the framework that we've already created? Right. And so to me, that, and obviously you can repeat that when we get to the other contracting, but maybe that's just a place to start. And that would just be my off the cuff response.
Yeah. Meg.
So, for example, if some of the designs that we saw today, if you could specifically point to a piece of that design, or like the way that the interchange was made, and using the framework that we have, say, we did this because we're trying to make sure that we don't run over a house, or, you know, something of that nature, something that will continually like push people out of that space, or businesses that are already existing. We designed it intentionally to avoid that, or something of that nature, just kind of demonstrating how the design plays into keeping people housed, keeping businesses that already exist there, encouraging others to pop up because of the design of the space, something like that. Is that maybe I'm the only one who wants something like that, but just to say, hey, we use this part of the framework to make this design choice, and that's why we're encouraging this choice. Something like that, maybe.
Jake, did you want to lean in there?
As far as having elements that we can point to, that, I mean, it sounded like something that we should put together, as far as what we can say, you know, directly as we've gone through this design process. You know, there are certainly things in the screening criteria that this group helped develop, where, for example, the Hayden Island interchange and how that was rated on from an equity perspective, and going in the modified LPA with the half instead of full interchange, as something that we felt was less impactful on the local community and local businesses. And so it scored higher on our equity criteria. So yeah, I think that's something that we could put together to call out for you. And I think that a lot of folks would like to see that. So I appreciate the suggestion.
Shane?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Meg and John were saying. I'm looking at the equity framework page 5, where we list out the 6 equity objectives and just treat that like a checklist. So taking the presentation we just got about the span design, ask yourselves, or have the design crew ask themselves those 6 items. Does this design bear on the mobility and accessibility specifically for underserved communities? Does the physical design integrate equity, area history, et cetera, et cetera? And some of the equity objectives won't be at all relevant, and that's fine. And but I think that's a nice framework to use to evaluate sort of these different elements. Yeah, so I feel like we got the tool there. And that's something I think that would be really cool to see when you guys bring something here, just run it through that filter, and then we can kind of discuss it and see if that feels like a good evaluation of it, or if you want to add something. But yeah, it feels like we got a tool, and we just got to use it.
Appreciate that suggestion. I think that is 100% doable. And I know we've already started internally kind of teasing out some of those sort of equity lens types questions. Another thing that we'll be doing internal to the IBR team is standing up an internal equity council where we'll have task leads from each of the various tasks, really intentionally walking through how they are integrating the framework across the board. And we can report out some of that fodder as well.
Great. Well, why don't we move, Sabrina?
I just wanted to kind of affirm what Janelle was saying. I think there's those internal spaces where the project is using the lens, and like it would be really great to hear those report out. So I think that would be, yes, affirming that.
Right, we'll do. Jake, I don't know if you wanted to speak more to some of that.
Only that, yeah, we're on the exact same page. And I think there's been over the past, in particular, 6 months to, 6 to 9 months, I think our team and the design team have been coming together and realizing that we do need to show exactly how the framework's incorporated, and like Shane said, specifically along the objectives, are these things furthering those objectives? If so, how? And we have a tool in the framework, a worksheet that the intent has been to report out back to this group along those lines. And that's still the intent. We just admittedly have not yet. But the design area, as we talk more and more about the design engineering side of things, more that Casey is talking about, as well as the urban design things that we'll get into right after this, I think it'll become a little bit more clear how that's happening, and how we're trying to be more explicit about it. So, but yes, I think we're on the same page, and I think we can certainly do a better job of coming to this group and showing our work.
Good deal. Now let's move to the urban design. And Casey, it's been lovely to have you, and we will have you again, which will be good. Yeah.
Quick context before you start the video, Emily. So the folks that you are going to hear from are in London. There's a London-based firm, Knight Architecture, that is leading the bridge design, or heavily involved in the bridge design. And so right now it's like 2 a.m. there. So they had them record a video, and so it's about 20 minutes long, but and then we'll go into some good discussion afterwards.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Osborne from Knight Architects.
Hi, and I'm Laura Langridge, also from Knight Architects. We're both part of the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program team, looking at the design of the bridges and structures along this route.
Thank you very much for letting us present to you via a pre-recorded presentation. Today we're based in the UK, and it's in the early hours at our time. We hope to attend in a live setting and an in-person setting in the coming months, and we'll make sure we get your feedback and respond to your questions accordingly. We're just going to take you through a little bit about our approach to design, how we get to a good design for the IBR project, and a little consideration around people and route and users. So we'll start with talking through who we are, how we get there, the why and the who, which are fundamental questions to any design process. We'll explore the design goals for this scheme and its users, and we'll also consider what's important to you as an individual. So we're Knight Architects. We specialize exclusively in bridge design. We're part of the IBR team alongside WSP. For the past 17 years, bridges is all we've done. And I hope that you can see in this slide quite a variety of solutions. And that's very much intentional. We don't have a company style. And that's because good design is a response to people and to place. And so the diversity of our portfolio hopefully reflects our intentions to produce good, appropriate fitting design that puts people and context at its center. And so how do we get to good design for the IBR? Well, firstly, we have to establish what good design looks like. We think it needs to be deliberate, to be clear and collectively understood. You'll have seen some typologies on the web page, and these aren't intended to be to convey complete designs. Really, these are thinking about high level sketches and typologies as a starting point, but the design process has got a lot yet to do. And what we don't want to do is present you with these typologies, these types of bridges, and simply ask you which one you like the best, or even to show you those typologies alongside a set of design criteria and start to score them as to which achieves those criteria better or worse than the others. That is part of it, but it's not the whole. It's not the whole design process. If you only go down this sort of matrix approach, we find it does achieve the least worst design, but that's not what we're aiming for here. We're very much aiming to achieve the best design. Bridge architecture is often misunderstood as decoration, and that's certainly not what we want to achieve here. We're looking for something site specific, something integrated and efficient, that gets its form through its structure and contributes to people and place with an integrated solution. It does that by asking sort of people-focused questions first. So not questions like, what does it look like and how will it be built? Rather, we have to start with questions surrounding the challenge. Why is it required and who is it for? In short, we have to first think of people and then think of object. We wanted to show this slide because this is a project that we've been working alongside WSP with for the past 10 or 11 years now. And it's called the Krunuusilauta Crown Bridges project in Helsinki. And the form is not important, but what we wanted to convey was a sense of refinement over time that takes place along the design process. The original typology was drawn on day one in the competition back on 2012, in this case a cable-stayed bridge. But it's taken quite a long process of refinement to make sure that that typology results in a structure that is a positive asset for its communities, gets people to where they need to go, does so comfortably and safely, and allows the urban realm around it to be positively influenced by it, and well integrated with it. Now, of course, our design challenge is very different with the complexities of IBR, but that process remains largely the same. We start with an alignment design, which is the sort of 3D ribbon that the road takes as it passes in the north-south direction. But underneath that ribbon, we've got to hold it up with structure, with piers and deck. And that structure has to respond very much to what's below it. Over the river, the structure is comparatively regular. Then as it spans land and road, the piers get more complex in their arrangement as on and off ramps start to diverge from the main carriageway. Around this structure, on the right of the slide there, is the urban realm, and the job of good design is really for the bridge architect to interact incredibly well with the urban design team, so that the structure above and the urban realm below are each contributing positively to a sense of place. I'll pass over at this point to Laura, who's just going to talk you through about that process and some of the considerations that we make along the way.
Thanks, Tom. So what we want to start looking at here is the process that we want to go through in terms of talking about this design with you. And what we'd like to start with today is really looking at bridge design values. So this is starting to set out, who is this bridge for? Why is it important? And then in future conversations, we'd like to talk about bridge design constraints. So very binary, what does this bridge need to achieve in terms of shipping clearances, capacity on the roadway, and all those kinds of more practical constraints. And then once we've looked at that holistically, then we can start to look at how we're going to achieve this. So bridge configuration, bridge typology, and then from those very large scale aims down to things that are more specific. So non-structural bridge elements, and then also things that are wider on the project itself, so route-wide structure design. So the project purpose and need and desired outcomes have been set up for the IBR program, and they say a lot about the need of the program as a whole, but very high level aims, and they don't tell us a lot about what the actual bridge design should look like. We've been working with the urban design team to set out a series of urban design principles and goals that follow on from the program-wide purpose and need and vision and values. And these goals are intended to guide each of our respective disciplines in order that we would be aiming for the same thing and that we can achieve a holistic design for the urban elements and the areas on and around and under the bridge. So looking at the desired outcomes, we've got quite a number of them, and some of them will be met by any and all of the design options that are being studied. Some will be addressed in coordination with other design disciplines, and then some of them are really directly linked to the design of the urban bridges, design of the bridges and the urban realm. So those are the ones that we want to pull out as really starting to guide our design goals. We want to combine those with some of the equity objectives that have been set up with this group here, as well as some other wider objectives from different groups on the project. And then we want to formulate these design goals into something that directly affects what we draw and what we build. Some of these outcomes are so broad that it's very difficult to respond specifically with the design. So what we would like to do is to develop these, bring all these principles together and synthesize it into something that has specific design goals that are centered at a very human scale. So thinking about how people live around this bridge, how they use it, how it influences their lives. So who is this bridge for? Who are the people that this is going to impact? Wide variety of different users, different abilities, different modes of transport and viewpoints. And our good design needs to respond to all of this, whether they're on the bridge or the structures underneath, some very challenging spots on this program underneath the bridges that we will be looking at, and around the structures as well. So what it looks like when you're in the community, looking at it in the distance. And this affects the whole program and not only the main river crossing itself. So rather than simply zooming around a 3D model, we wanted to give it a real center on the human experience. So we picked a number of routes on, under, and around the bridge. And we wanted to start to look at these routes to help pull out specific design goals that are directly related to how people experience the bridge. We want to start with the ones that are of people who might be most vulnerable, I guess, as a user to situations that would make them uncomfortable. So if you're in a car driving along the I-5 and the program is working as it should, traffic should be flowing, you'll be comfortable in your car and quite happy. But there is a potential for the impact of the people around the bridge who don't have that kind of protection of a private vehicle to feel more dwarfed by the scale and the size of the structures that are coming through their community. So they need special attention in terms of how we're going to look at it. So what we've started to do is look at very high-level sketches of Lizzie in this case, who's traveling east-west across Hayden Island. And we would really like to get your feedback and your input on what might be important to Lizzie at each of these points, whether it's when she sees the I-5 visible in the distance or as she's approaching this very large structure, what would make her feel safe using this, whether it's daytime, nighttime, what would make this a good and positive addition to this community and to her use.
We should add that the design you're seeing here isn't really what we're trying to present to you at this stage. We're really trying to present a framework for assessing future designs, so that a kind of a narrative through which, or a lens through which you can understand design considerations. We should also add that no one user is sort of more important than others, so there's no hierarchy to this. The bridge will affect them positively and negatively quite differently. So the sort of metrics you're seeing on the screen are sort of placeholder examples, and the design is really a sort of template for us to explore typical arrangements, typical moments in different journeys to gather feedback and sort of build consensus around how the design can most appropriately respond to each user at each location on their journey.
So this one, looking at the specific undercrossing, we've got questions here for you in terms of what's important here, and even potentially how can the structural design support equity and the aims for equity on this project. Looking at some examples of undercrossings might help to trigger some thoughts about this. So we've got a few different examples here, the one on the left being a very more enclosed space underneath a rail line in this case, but it still feels quite positive. And it does so through a number of strategies, including the kind of high quality materials, adequate lighting, the fact that you can see right to the end and you can see your whole route. The one on the right is starting to look at the shaping of the structure itself and the abutments. So the abutments are kind of raked back and chamfered a bit, as is the deck, so that the thresholds between when you're outside of the bridge to being underneath is gradual and eased. This is another user here that we would like your feedback on as well, and looking at a commuter, cyclist commuter in this case, who needs to go up the ramps onto the bridge on Hayden Island. And the question is, what might be important to him when he's climbing the approach ramps on his bike? Could it be looking at the gradient, the comfort level? Does there need to be rest points? Or could it be looking at things like wayfinding? Is it positive to see where you're going? Or the quality of the deck soffit, so that's the underside of the deck. What does that feel like? Is it a positive space to be in, or is it a place that you want to get out of as quickly as possible? We won't talk in depth about the experience on deck today, as we will cover that more in the future. But this is an example that can start to think about that experience as well. What might help to make that space positive? Is it separation from traffic, clear views to the landscape? This is one of our projects where we looked at implementing those kinds of strategies in order to give the pedestrian realm a very comfortable and specifically pedestrian feel. On the right, you can see rest points that we implemented along this route to help break it up and give people a chance to stop and rest. On the bridge deck itself, what might be important? Is enclosure a good thing? Or are eyes on the path more important? So that's a balance to be talked about and discussed. In any case, we want to make it a very safe environment. The middle bridge is one where we're looking at using segregated cycle lanes, rest areas, and open views to the parapet. And then on the right, considering climatic conditions, so shade, potentially wind, how could we design to make it comfortable in all seasons and all weather? Sightseeing in the area, what might be important when sitting with a view of the bridge?
Sorry, unmute myself. I think it's important to recognize as well that a lot of these routes have a north-south axis. The users of the bridge, those that are on deck, those that are benefiting from the presence of the bridge. But equally, there's a really strong east-west interaction between the bridge and the communities that surround it. I think recently a reconnecting communities bill has been announced that seeks to undo some of the harm that's been caused by schemes that have had a negative effect on communities that surround them. And what we want to make sure that we are designing this right, so that we aren't part of a future bill, and so that we are working for those users that are crossing under the bridge in that east-west direction, visiting the site, not necessarily only those that are using the bridge to get across the water. Those view of and view from are particularly important. I think the sightseeing route here takes a bit of both, where perhaps somebody is unfamiliar with the site, may have to navigate through a relatively complex interaction of superstructure on top of urban realm as they try and get towards the waterfront to take their photo, at which point they may see the bridge and its identity, how memorable it is, will play a part in their memory of the place. They may then cross the bridge using it, gaining new vantage points, experience it on deck, before sort of landing at their sort of ultimate destination, being delivered from the bridge from height back down to grade again. So I think those view from experiences, as well as kind of east-west routes that are being kind of altered by the bridge, not necessarily helped by it, as well as the north-south routes that are being facilitated by the new infrastructure, are all really important to think about when you're asking yourself sort of what is important to me as a user.
And then, of course, it is important to consider the road users as well, as this is a scheme that will be impacting the experience on the highway. So what might be important to these users? And it's a major bridge, a major crossing of state lines here, and a gateway between the communities. That might be something that we want to look at, implementing design strategies that start to respond to that. So a question to ask here, what would be important to you crossing this bridge? That's what we have to share with you today. So we really like your feedback, and we will try our best to respond if you send questions, and would like to continue conversations around this.
Thank you very much, and we hope to meet you in a more live occurrence for the next meeting. All the best.
Thank you. All right, so we have Rob Thurton and Mike Siska. Have I said it? I don't. Have I said it right, Mike?
Pishka.
And Mike Pishka from the IBR structures team to answer some questions. We were going to have some breakout rooms, and we're not now, but we are going to discuss some of what we've seen. And Jake, are there specific slides for us to look at in to begin our discussion, or should we just move into questions?
Yeah, I think it would be good. So the idea with the breakouts, and we can do this as a group as much as possible, given the time, but we wanted to go through kind of those users like they presented, and as you're looking at their experience of traveling, you know, either by bike or walking, whatever, you know, what is important for those folks to have a good experience, to feel safe, etc. So Emily, would you bring up the yes. So thinking of Lizzie, so we were going to break up in breakout groups and have 2 groups and have one do 2 of these people and the other do the other 2. But you know, figure we can just kind of throw this out there, and just we wanted to hear your thoughts as far as when you look down at those those 1, 2, 3, 4 different contexts. You know, what is important? What do we need to be really thinking about? What should that environment look like, and so on. So wanted to spur that conversation. Maybe we can focus in on the underbridge crossing, and I think the next slide, yeah. You know, I'm sure many of you have crossed underneath highway, or I think we should actually start just using carriageway. I think that's a much more I like that British phrase. But yeah, so as you're looking at under crossings, you know, those aren't always the best environment, but they can be made into one that's at least navigable and comfortable. What would that look like to you? What would that look like for Lizzie and her nephew, if you're in their spot?
So Lizzie is a pedestrian and is going to walk under the bridge to get to the other side.
Yes.
I can jump in. I think sight lines are really important. So, I mean, I mentioned in the presentation, I agree with being able to see where you're going underneath the structure. So see to the other side. It looks like off to the right, there's kind of this open area and some pillars. It would also be nice to kind of not feel like there's anything hiding under there. Be nice to feel like it's not too dark and not deafening underneath the overpasses. I know oftentimes walking underneath overpasses, it can be really loud, hard to hear what's going on around you. So I think anything to attenuate that could make you more comfortable.
Can I say what I feel some of the hesitation might be? I'm going to keep it 100. I'm not really worried about Lizzie right now. And I think that's why I'm having a hard time answering this question for you, is because Lizzie walking under the bridge, I feel, is so far in the future versus this bridge going through someone's home, backyard, and anything else, that I feel like we're not focusing on the correct lens at the time. If I'm saying that as kindly as I can. I'm someone from California. I live very close to a city by the name of East Palo Alto. It is adjacent to Palo Alto, one of the most affluent cities in actually all of the US. But East Palo Alto does not reflect it at all. And it's called East for a reason. It's because it's where everybody else was pushed. That didn't fit into the aesthetic of Palo Alto. And there's a Dumbarton Bridge there. And the Dumbarton Bridge flows right along the water of that area. And East Palo Alto was very much forgotten until the bridge was redone. And then once the bridge was redone, gentrification started to happen. And as much as I appreciate what is being presented right now, I can't not say something that I feel like we're forgetting those that are already there versus those to come. And I just really wish that that would be where the conversation probably starts. But if I'm the only one speaking out of turn, I will shut my mouth.
No, and I'm going to go with Sabrina and Meg, and see how it all knits together. Sabrina?
Yeah, so I definitely hear or want to acknowledge your comments on the challenge of balancing all that, the like now and the future. I think that I guess the conversations that we've had throughout this process have always kind of come back to like for who and like that people getting to the people. And so I think like to me, it is, I am happy to see like, so start to envision like what the use of the bridge will look like. I think a question that I still have is who is Lizzie? that really kind of weighs in on, for me, how this structure supports or doesn't support equity. And so I think I wonder if, we also have that equity index that was a part of the equity framework that kind of identified the areas in which there were concentrations of the different priority communities, and to have that lens on like who this is, and I think has significant implications on how do we make sure that this structure, this crossing is safe and reflects equity.
And I just real quick, I do want to say, I mean, if who Lizzie is impacts what you would like, what you think is best for this to look like, for what should be included. I mean, we certainly want to hear that too. And if you're saying, well, let's say Lizzie is a person who uses a wheelchair, some of this is not rocket science, that we want accessible surfaces, we want wide sidewalks, we want curb ramps, all that. But if there's other considerations, if Lizzie is from this demographic, like we're interested in having those conversations, definitely. And we just, this is a situation where we don't want to miss the opportunity to get some of this input as we're early in this process. But I hear I hear what you're saying. It makes sense. But anyway, just wanted to make that point.
Meg, and then John.
I absolutely, I'm right on board with what Sabrina and Nicole have brought up. Just like, who is this person? Why are they walking instead of driving? Why aren't they taking a bus? Do they not feel safe on a bus? Is there no bus that goes through there now because it's a walking path? There are a lot of little pieces. But more than anything, a trip to a grocery store should be as aesthetically pleasing as possible, even in a built environment, right? So not having just big clumps of concrete be the only thing that you see on your walk, that's ideal. I mean, if we're going to get really specific about how it could be a very beautiful space to walk through, that's great. We can get there, but we need to make sure that people who are accessing that space have not been cut off in any other way, they have access in more than just that one way of getting to the store as well. If this is where we get to talk about aesthetics, I'm all for it, but we also need to focus on who these people are and who will be using this program. And yeah, I think this is like going beyond where we haven't hit yet, I don't think, in terms of who we need to be thinking about when it comes to the construction of this space.
Mm-hmm.
So, John?
I too appreciate everything that's been said. And I mean, I think it's interesting because Jake has all the data, but we have a pretty good sense of who lives where today. So now that was discussed, maybe 8 months or a year ago or something. And there'll also have to be, more Title VI analysis done as we get closer to the project. So, but I also agree that this is about use cases. It's about who are the different, what are they going underneath this bridge for? And I would hate to, obviously we're going to have that displacement conversation in the full, and it's not going to be in 5 minutes at the end of a meeting. And to me, you're wanting to know how it should feel for different use cases going underneath this and what it should look like. It did feel like it was more of an aesthetic conversation, but I also understand that people still have concerns, which they should, because we're still seemingly at the beginning. We just got some of the money, right? So, but I just, maybe the conversation needs to be organized a little bit differently, so we don't feel like somehow if we miss talking about amazing lighting and different use cases for all the folks that would use this, that it's done in the next 5 minutes. And maybe maybe that's where some of the anxiety is coming from. But I also think the danger, the danger of these long projects is we forget what we've already sort of committed to. And because we're not talking about it in a moment, it doesn't mean the commitment's not there. It just means we're trying to have a conversation of one of the 30 things we need to work through. So I maybe just a little bit of a call back to how some of these larger issues will be addressed as the project goes on, and how, you know, this is the beginning of that conversation of the aesthetics. So.
And great point, John. I mean, we certainly, this is not the only conversation around these types of things. We did want it to be about more than, you know, just aesthetics. It to be, it can encompass a lot of things around the design topic and the space around the bridge. But yeah, a lot more to come. So don't worry. we're not just saying tell us now or forever hold your peace. Anyway, back to you, Dr. Hunt.
Hey, Brent, do we have anyone for public comment?
We do not have anyone signed up for public comment.
Okay. All right. So we have about 2 or 3 minutes more. What would be a useful way for us to proceed? I'm nodding to Janelle and Jake around this, and also Mark.
Jake, you want to
Mike,
take a first crack?
I guess as far as next steps, is that what you're saying, Dr. Hunt?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So I mean, this series of conversations around urban design, we will continue for the next several months, including, you may have heard the Tom on the video mention that they were looking at having them come out specifically to talk, you know, bridge design, and have an in-person meeting. We are thinking that we would potentially do an in-person meeting with this group as well as the community advisory group, so that we can have more of a bit of a workshop type setting. We can have some actual, you know, more real conversations around things. But as far as immediate next steps, I mean, I think we've gotten some good input here that we will certainly reflect in the meeting notes, and then follow up at the next meeting. And it sounds, what I'm hearing is specifically kind of around this more urban design stuff, that I guess this group needs, maybe would like to take a step back, or need some more information to be able to inform that conversation. But I could actually use some clarity on what that really looks like. What would be most helpful? I heard, you know, who we're talking about, what the characteristics of the folks we're talking about is. I heard, you know, talking about the bigger issues of, say, displacement or property impacts, et cetera. And we have some of that. We have some of that information as what Casey showed. But again, these are kind of things being studied. So it's a weird time. It's a weird time in the project. But yeah, any other thoughts as far as the information that would be helpful to inform your thinking? Would love to hear that.
Something I did hear a number of times is to ask some of the designers to look at the equity framework that had been created, and to point to where that has weighed into their analysis.
Yeah, I heard that pretty loudly and clearly, and we know that that's been happening under the hood, but we need to do a better job of socializing, particularly with this group, as to where that occurred, and kind of have the conversation, be within the context of that. So that was really a good piece of feedback that we heard, and we'll be sure to integrate moving forward as well. I think you got a little bit more of that in this most recent presentation in terms of how the equity objectives were considered as part of some of that preliminary work.
Yeah. So we are coming to a close, except non-closure, and we will keep with the process and our relationships, not just the solution. And if we could have our meeting evaluation poll, we have our future meetings. Our next meeting is July 17th, 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. Mark your calendars. And also mark your calendars for August 21st, 5:30 to 7:30. 3 takeaways from our conversation tonight. So, and anyone is free to contribute a takeaway. 3 takeaways.
This is Sabrina from Metro. Just appreciation for the hard work of applying racial equity, creating racial equity strategy in the midst of doing something. It's hard work, and it's hard to be creative on timelines and create new systems and new structures. And so just appreciation for being in that process with you all and working through the challenge of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I remember. I think the complexity of applying the equity framework at some of these as some of these design choices come forward. The need for reflective feedback. So one more, if you will. I think my camera may freeze, so I'll turn myself off, but one more to close us out.
I'll just chime in and say, I think a key takeaway for me is, again, the importance of the equity advisory group to continue to pose these questions and to push the program to reflect the framework and to operationalize it as we kind of move forward. So thank you all for leaning in with us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Be well.
See you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.